Fun stuff today. I've got Rick here in the studio with me. We just got back from an epic workshop in the Palouse. Really fun times. We're gonna share some images from that trip, talk about the place as a location, share some lessons learned, and heap a little bit more praise on our Sony and Nikon 100 to 400 millimeter lenses. Well, hey everybody, it's a real treat to have Rick LePage, my good buddy, friend, co-worker, co-workshop leader here in the studio with me. We ran a really fun workshop with a great group of people a couple weeks ago in the Palouse. We're gonna take you on a little trip through that gorgeous farm country, kind of reminiscent of those Tuscan rolling hills, but set in eastern Washington on the border with Idaho up north. So we'll talk about some of the things we learned on that workshop, share some of the good times that we had, and both of us talk about why we're just hugely enamored with our 100 to 400 millimeter lenses. Rick has the Sony on his A1. I've got the Nikon on my Z9, and I'm going to show you how many images I chose to capture with that lens compared to other lenses on this trip. Kind of amazing. Also, just a quick little hit, there'll be a lot more about it, but I got my new 800 millimeter 6.3 lens and fired off a few frames around the yard in a little hour.
Big lens.
It's a big lens. It's a big lens, but it's fun. And in just an hour shooting with it, I got some shots that I wouldn't have been able to get without. I'm going to be taking it to Costa Rica with me, and I'm really excited about it. So look forward to some more stuff coming about that. Oh, quick other announcement. We've got office hours on the 24th, 10 a.m. Pacific, May 24th. We're going to be talking about traveling in general, traveling with photo gear in particular, taking your questions. It's going to be, the usual gang talking about traveling with gear. You can submit questions about any photographic topic of interest, but if you have ones about traveling with gear, that's what we're looking for. All right, cool. So let's jump in. I know there are some people who probably haven't heard of the Palouse, but I think most photo workshop junkies have heard of the Palouse because it's this beautiful landscape of rolling hills, and in the spring and in the fall, you get these spectacular colors, and there are some high points to look out at with longer lenses and photograph those sort of almost abstract landscapes of rolling hills and color, and there's just beautiful skies and weather that happen there. We had a great group, full workshop, full van load, taking El Jefe, the Sprinter, out there, and we were able to really see some unique, interesting light. It was actually, I think, the best conditions that I've been there to photograph. One of the evenings we had no wind. And not that much haze. Haze is a problem you contend with working with long lenses in the landscape. So let's just look through some images. On the way in, I took a couple of workshop participants who flew into Portland, and just driving in, we witnessed this one rain squall coming across these freshly tilled hills and a little bit of new, just the drama in the sky. I love, people looked at the weather forecast and they're like, well, there's a chance of rain multiple days. And I'm thinking, it shows partly cloudy, chance of rain. That's changing light. That's dramatic weather. We got out there and quickly, this is just turning the other direction. I stopped the van to photograph that storm cloud, but then I looked at that just beautiful light on that farm country. I love some of the big granaries and silos, and you'll see what this looks like from up above, from the vantage point of Steptoe Butte, which is a place that people love to photograph from. First day out, we got our crew together out working around this farm. What's the name of that farm? It's the Dahlman Farm. Dahlman Farm. And here's just proof, our good friend Hoot out there with his Phase 1 system. It's not a Nikon-only workshop.
No, it is not. It is not.
We have a lot of people show up with Nikon gear, but we have people with Fuji and Sony and even Phase 1, and he did some beautiful work with that big camera.
Yes, he did.
So there's a fun place. There's a lot of, it was a bit of an overcast day. And we went out and just warmed up around some of these crazy wagon wheel fences and beautiful old farm details. And I actually jumped in and started doing a little macro work. And this is an image that was kind of fun. I noticed this this wasp nest inside the hub of one of those wheels, and I got in there with my 105 millimeter macro, and it was so dark in the middle. I was hand holding, but I used that technique with capturing a burst bracketed. So one frame, 3 stops underexposed, one on the meter, 3 stops overexposed, and then blended those in Lightroom to get this HDR macro, and it worked out
pretty well.
Yeah, it came out kind of fun. And just the rust and the lichen growing in that wet, moist environment on all that old rusting iron was kind of fun to play around with the macro lens. And then, there's Hefe opened up. Actually, we almost got creamed by a truck. Well, I almost got creamed by a truck. A truck came around the bend, and there was a car that was going slower than it expected, and it got skidding in this roadside farm area. Luckily, everybody was pretty far off the road except Rick and I and Terry, who's standing by Rick there. We all had quite a show as this truck boiled smoke off its tires, kind of sliding by us. It was a little scary. But beautiful old barns and falling down buildings like this old granary.
And some dramatic sky.
And then we took the crew up to Steptoe Butte, which is just a magnificent place. You start to get
3,200 feet, I think. And it just sort of rises above everything.
Yeah.
And you get sort of this 360-degree view. You can sort of wander around, and there's multiple levels you can go as well.
Yep.
You can sort of get down low and sort of get nice, long, shots. You can also sort of go all the way up to the top, although when it's hazy, it's tough to shoot from the top.
Often you get less sharp images from up on the top. That's a tip for people going on their own out there. The tendency is to drive straight to the top and have the 360-degree view, but you're shooting through more atmosphere, more haze. This is kind of the middle ground here. Rick got this image of just a gorgeous cloud that was hovering out there in the distance. You can see there's a bit of haze shooting the long shot out there.
Yeah, this was earlier in the week. Yep.
I will say that this is my first trip to the Palouse with a 100 to 400 millimeter lens. Rick and I said we were going to talk about our 100 to 400. Yeah. Rick has had, well, actually the first time we were up in the Palouse with CJ, he had a 100 to 400 Sony, and that made Rick really jealous.
Yep. So I actually bought that one not long after we went on that trip.
And the whole time I've got my 70 to 200 and a 1.4 teleconverter and my 500 PF, and I'm juggling. I'm putting the converter on, taking the converter off, putting the 500 on, switching back to the 70 to 200, and thinking, man, I'm kind of jealous of those guys having that focal range from 100 to 400 and just being able to twist the zoom ring. So now that Nikon finally has the 100 to 400 S lens out there. I know they've had the 80 to 400, but I never really liked that lens. It's just really slow focusing. So it was just a blast shooting with this lens. And I shot a lot with the 1.4 teleconverter too.
Yeah, I did the same. I did the same. I mean, I got rid of my Sony 70 to 200 more than a year and a half ago because once I got this lens, it's like that and the 1.4 teleconverter, and it's great.
I've gotten some really strange looks from Nikon people because I think that the 70 to 200 S 2.8 lens is one of the finest lenses I've ever owned, but I sold it right after this trip. It was kind of a test to me. I did not, no, I didn't even bring it with me. I have been taking both lenses along and not mounting the 70 to 200 just because of the versatility of this. And the fact that, I mean, if I shot indoor high school sports or some kind of a low-lit activity, or if I was primarily a portrait photographer and I needed that shallower depth of field, then I would still keep it. But for what I do, travel, landscape photography, carrying my gear on my back, I don't want to pack both of these lenses, and I don't want to be without this one. It's razor sharp, fast focusing, and gives me everything from 100 to 400, and then you throw a 1.4 on it, it becomes a 560. Just incredible versatility and beautiful, beautiful results out of this thing. So there you go. If we jumped into our grid view here in Lightroom and I took a look at what the metadata here is on these lenses, and you look, you've got the Sony, four of Rick's are taken with just the straight lens, 2 of them are taken with the teleconverter. You've got a couple of drone photos that I'm going to show you. Rick's 135 millimeter lens, a couple of photos. when it comes to my photos, 15 of them are with the 100 to 400. 9 of them are with it in the teleconverter. There's a few macro shots and a few shots with my 24 to 120. I shot almost exclusively, my favorite images from this trip are almost exclusively with that lens. So that just tells you something. All right, let's jump back in, keep talking about these images. You know, here's one. It's been a wet, cold spring in the Pacific Northwest, and there's been snow later than anyone would expect it. So there was a lot of freshly tilled fields. And
they were working hard when we were out there.
Yeah,
I mean, every night we were out, there were people out tilling, in their tractors tilling.
Till dusk.
Yep.
Yeah. And I thought these browns and some of the new seedlings coming up in patterns were quite amazing.
It was interesting, you know, when we got there and you're looking, you know, normally when we've been there, there's so much green. All of the hills are green.
Yeah.
You know, and there was more brown. It was different. Mm-hmm. But as we found out, you know, shooting, especially from up there,
it's still beautiful.
It's beautiful, and the browns worked well with the greens and the yellows, and I mean, it was a different type of experience, but just as amazing in terms of images.
I loved kind of the stripes of the new seedlings coming up before they've filled in the rows. Here we got Carl out working with his 100 to 400, and he's got that lightweight tripod I love so much. There's some more, you know, this is a view that Rick took that just shows the browns blending with the greens, blending with the yellows, and you get a feeling for that haze that the further out the long subject is, the more you're kind of dealing with atmospheric haze. You know, I like being a little lower on step-toe to just get those sharp images. It was great. The first night there, we had nice light, and you know, it was a little bit hazy. There was a little bit of wind, but a beautiful night. There's Charlie enjoying it.
Yes.
Another one of Rick's images just showing some of those sections that have been planted and how green and rolling it could be. But also, you know, how that haze plays into it.
Yeah, that was earlier. That was actually, I think, the night before the workshop started. I was out there sort of just scouting, taking a look at things.
Night.
Yeah, and it was much hazier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a luck of the draw with how much haze there is in the air. This was a shot that I took where it's tighter, closer up, you know, not looking at that haze in the distance and using all that reach from the 100 to 400 and I think a 1.4 teleconverter and just, you know, pulling in those details. Gosh, that lens is so sharp.
Yeah.
Here's one of Rick's where I just love that splash of red.
Yep. That's another, just, you know, 100 to 400, just like get in and sort of work that landscape in terms of, you know, looking for patterns and the way the light just sort of dapples on these. And just wonderful.
I remember studying with Art Wolf a little bit in my early days, and he talked about extractive landscapes. You know, people asked him what his favorite lens for travel and landscape photography was, and he said it's my 70 to 200. You know, back in those days, it was just the film to digital transition. And he said it's that ability to hone in on what's interesting in the landscape. It was a beautiful sunset that night too, and this just showcases that new S100 to 400 does a fine job shooting into backlight. I've been just blown away by it. This is an HDR again, and you know, as I shot this, the 3 under on the meter 3 over still looked overexposed to me, and I wound up building in some exposure compensation and starting about 1.5 stops underexposed, and then shooting 3 stops less than that. 1 1.5 stops underexposed, and then 1 1.5 stops overexposed, and that was how it came in. We went to Palouse Falls, and we had an interesting day. It was overcast, great day for shooting waterfalls. But you know, I was out shooting, I think this is with my 24 to 120, and I did a really long exposure. I stacked 16 stops of neutral density to do 120 seconds to sort of get that swirl in the pool, clouds blurred coming over. Just something kind of different, but you know, it wasn't all that compelling to me. And there were these little marmots there. I actually shot some video of these marmots. Check this little bit of video out. And anyhow, they were super cute, and I slapped the 100 to 400 on, just to sort of zoom in and got myself in a position where you can see that he's near a waterfall. And then there were some birds flying around, some crows and some ravens and even some pigeons down near the falls. And I was kind of tracking birds around, and this flock of pigeons took off around the waterfall. And it was one of those moments where suddenly I saw it in the frame, and I held down my 20 frames per second lossless raw capability of the Z9, and I was zoomed in at 400 millimeters with that lens, and just this instant happened. And these guys are so crazy sharp. It's just, there's only a hint of color here up in the walls around the falls, but just one of those kind of happy accidents.
Yeah.
And I just love, this is my favorite image, I think, from the trip.
Yeah.
We did a little printing. I'll pull a couple prints out at the end here. Rick and I have been playing around, and we both love to print, and we've been kind of collaborating on making this a better print. But wow, what a beautiful night. The next morning we went back up to Steptoe because there was a potential for the sunrise. This is about as much color as we got.
Yeah.
And I actually shot a bit of time lapse. I set up and I did a couple time lapses. I did one where it was a 2-second interval, and then another where it was a 1-second interval. And the neat thing is the clouds were just blowing through and exposing and disappearing from the farmland.
That low-level ground fog was something else.
It was blowing by like a freight train. But while I was kind of focused on doing that stuff, I feel like Rick got the shot of the day. There were some other folks in our workshop who got some really beautiful stuff with the kind of halo of mist playing over the top of this hill too. But I just love the composition of that. I love the way it all rolls together.
And this was, again, 100 to 400.
Yeah.
And, just such a versatile length.
We also saw the bare-bottom porcupine of Steptoe Butte.
Did, yes.
We were driving up in the dark, and this porcupine who'd clearly gotten into it with a coyote and lost a bunch of the quills around his behind.
Yes.
But
was still moving.
Ambling up the road.
Yeah.
It was pretty cute. We went out the next day, and I actually flew my drone. I'm just loving my DJI Air 2S. And we were in this fun spot where the clouds were just gorgeous. We were waiting for it to clear up on Steptoe Butte. It was supposed to be a nice night up on Steptoe. And it's just great if you're in the Palouse to just roll along those dirt roads, depending on conditions. Right. You gotta be careful not to get stuck. Of course, there's hundreds of tractors out there to pull you out if something does go haywire. But we got the whole group out in this one spot just because it was a lovely rolling bunch of hills that blended in with the clouds. Rick, talk us through this panorama.
Yeah, this is actually shot with the 100 to 400. I think it was 100. I think it was at 100. And it's a multi-row pano. I really wanted to get this sort of undulating line at the bottom, but I wanted to get enough clouds too. So I just sort of did 2 rows with quite a bit of overlapping, and this ridge right here was just amazing.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I flew the drone around looking, for a little bit of abstract scenes and filming a little bit of B-roll of the group as they're kind of shooting along the road. And it's a fun place to fly drones too. You check on your safe before you fly app, and no restrictions. Head out over farm country. Not a lot to mess up. There's Steve and Rick and some of the rest of the gang out there. And Rick, actually lean down with your hood on. A bit of blue, I think, is you. There's a happy guy. Looking at the weather forecast that the clouds are supposed to clear for sunset. Here's a little abstract from the drone looking down. It's just kind of crazy what you can do. You'd have to hire a helicopter for that in the past. And then this is this evening when we got out on Steptoe and it just started opening up. And there was very little haze and almost no wind. I mean, it was one of the nicest nights I've ever been up there.
Yeah.
And you can see the clouds are starting to part. You got, just like we talked about, we got these people out just working nonstop, tilling. This is going to load in. It's sharper than that. There you go. You can see the acuity wide open on that 100 to 400. It's pretty nuts. So windmills to one side, grassy fields to the other. I think I slapped on the 1.4 teleconverter and never took it off for the rest of this night.
Yeah, I was kind of the same way.
There's Brad and Rick as the light's coming up. I mean, everybody was just in a happy mood.
Yeah. Well, Steptoe is one of those places we go to multiple times during the Palouse workshop because it's always different up there.
Every single night.
And you want to be able to luck into that magical light.
This is an interesting one. I think you should always be thinking about the scene, you know, in different ways to capture the same little piece. This little farmstead was so beautiful, and I love the line of this road leading through the scene and this line of trees in the background. And I thought, well, that's really, you know, a lovely way to portray it. But then I liked the vertical, and there was a farmer, once again, up tilling out there in the distance that kind of adds that little something to it, and this interesting line from farm equipment leading in. But then I was looking through, you know, Rick's images, and Rick honed in and just took those trees. This is that same group of trees right here.
Well, and it was
different light a little bit.
Yeah, the light was just sort of coming through, and you know, when it comes and hits these hills, it just constantly changes.
It's constantly changing.
And there was this one sequence of about 4 or 5 minutes when this row of trees just lit up, you know, and had that little bit of light in the foreground. I mean, I've got a shot from probably about 3 minutes after this shot's taken, and these are all dark now.
Yeah, well, look at mine. You know? They're not lit up like yours. Yeah.
And it was just sort of, we spent a lot of time just sort of sitting and waiting for watching the way the light sort of dappled the scene in front of us. And
I didn't include it, but I have that one panorama of that tree with the ditch line, and I was waiting for the light forever on it. I love this one. I had one selected of the...
yeah, and this one is 560.
Yeah.
You know, this is the 1.4. Again, you know, I've got shots where the growers is not lit, you know, it's just sort of got afterglow, but this one was sort of my favorite of that whole sequence.
I love it.
Just the way the light sort of in the foreground is really kind of dark, but then it just sort of takes you off into the distance. Yeah. And I love, one of the things I love about shooting from up Steptoe, you know, you get these just sort of ridges of evergreens, and they just really sort of,
they add.
Yeah, they just sort of add that depth and a sense of scale as well.
It's that Tuscan little feel to it. Absolutely. You know, yeah, it was a stellar night up there. Yep. I think that's about as excited as you'll see Rick. What a great guy. We had a wonderful time. The whole crew was just lovely out there.
Yeah.
You know, and just the light constantly changing. And I think we wrap it up with this one, which is another 560 little extractive shot that I got with playing around with that new lens. It was a fantastic workshop, and we even found some good places to eat in Pullman.
Yes,
we had some pretty tasty meals. So
yeah, it's a fun place to lead a workshop.
It really is. It really is.
It's very different, and you can pretty much drive anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, and find some great stuff to shoot. I mean, there's so much stuff we didn't even touch. You know?
Oh yeah, no.
Old abandoned barns and silos and things like that.
It's one of those places, which is the type of place we love to lead workshops, where you're constantly having to fight the urge to stop.
Yeah.
Because you know you're not going to get to Steptoe in time for sunset, but that scene is beautiful just outside the van. You know, it's one of those spots where if you stopped every time you saw a photograph, you would never get anywhere. And that's a great spot. I'm going to quickly grab a couple of prints that we were actually messing around with from yesterday. You just saw this one up on the screen, and Rick and I are going to be, by the way, running a workshop here in Portland next. Well, it's
early February.
Early February. It's a winter workshop on printing. We'll be here in Portland. Yep. We'll partake in some of Portland's fun food and eats.
We'll do a couple of shoots.
Yeah.
But mostly we'll be working on printing.
Right. Which both of us really love to do. And it's fun to come back from a big trip like this, work on your images, then craft them and print them. This image in particular, I did a big print of yesterday. It just wasn't, you know, it looked great on the screen, but then we brought it out on the print and it looked a little muddy, and we pulled the contrast more and took a little of the saturation out of the falls because there's a little bit of brown runoff in it, and it just really...
I had it upside down.
Oh, I have it upside down? Well, there you go. It's multitasking. So, fun stuff. We're really looking forward to running that workshop next year on printing. So, all right, everybody. Like I said, I think if you haven't tried out a 100 to 400 for your system, unless you shoot a lot of portraits in indoor sports where you need that 2.8 aperture, you know, the ISOs with our modern cameras are so good they can compensate for that f4 to f5.6 range that these, and they're getting down to where they're the same size and weight. Yeah. It's so versatile, so sharp.
Yes, these lenses are amazing. Yeah. I mean, they really, really are. Right. It's crazy how much this lens is on my camera.
Yeah.
You know,
I have now with 3 lenses, the 14 to 24, the 24 to 120, the 100 to 400, and having that 1.4 teleconverter, everything from 14 millimeters to 560 millimeters easily accessible in my pack. So cool stuff. All right, everybody. So this was an amazing workshop. It was a joy to run it with you. We had a great crew. I want to thank everybody who was on it. I had a blast with all of you. Yep. Remember, we're doing an office hours on traveling with gear before I take off for Costa Rica the 24th of this month, May 24th, 10 a.m. Pacific. Sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. If you're interested in a 100 to 400, I got links to everything I use and recommend over on my website. And I'll maybe throw one of Rick's Sony 100 to 400s up on there too. All right, and that's always hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. I hope that everyone out there is staying safe, staying creative, enjoying the change of seasons, and we'll see you next week.